Hey, everybody. Welcome to the GMI Rocket Show. I'm your host, Roman Zelichenko, former immigration attorney turned entrepreneur. I am the co founder and CEO of Laborless, an immigration tech platform that streamlines H-1B visa compliance, and also the founder of GMI Rocket, a digital marketing agency for the immigration and global mobility industry, and which brings you this show. Today is episode number 142. And our guest today is good friend Joey McKeown, who is the founder and owner of ImmigrationJobs, immigrationjobs.io, which is effectively a specialized recruitment company that focuses on helping immigration law firms and other businesses in the immigration industry find and retain amazing candidates, and also, of course, helps candidates find great jobs. Joey has had a really interesting career that really has spanned almost every role you can imagine in the immigration law space, working at multiple immigration firms and going from being a paralegal to a writer to head of operations and recruiting, and all of that culminated into eventually starting his own business, but not before going through his own immigration process as well. So we're going to get into that story. I'm really excited to learn more about Joey's journey and, of course, dig into what ImmigrationJobs does. Before we get there, I do want to say thank you to the main sponsor of this episode, 8 a.m. DocketWise. So DocketWise, aka 8 a.m. DocketWise, is an end-to-end immigration case management platform with best-in-class immigration forms, really customizable questionnaires in a ton of different languages, industry-leading integrations with payment systems, with calendar apps, with all sorts of different platforms, including my own Laborless. They have great customer service. I've known the team for many years, and even since they've been acquired and went from private to private equity backed and have changed their name, so many people that I know have stayed at the company and continue to be there. They continue to deliver great service and a great product. One of the things I really love about DocketWise, especially, is that they create a lot of content for the industry. So they have a really great blog that's super helpful for immigration attorneys and other practitioners. They have an free ebook. They have a podcast that I've been on as well. They support this show and other things in our industry. So I'm really grateful to DocketWise. If you are interested, if you're maybe shopping for a new immigration case management platform, whether you're a law firm or you're in-house, check them out at 8 a.m. So that's the number 8 a.m., like the time you would wake up for work, although I wake up later than that. 8am.com/DocketWise, or use the link in the show notes. And if you talk to them, tell them you heard about them from the GMI Rocket Show. Okay, so without further ado, Joey, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it. I know you're in Europe right now, so it's a little bit late for you. I know it's 1 o'clock here in New York, so I appreciate you taking the time, and I'm excited for this conversation.
Yeah, thanks, Roman. I'm happy to be here.
Definitely. And, one of the things we never really talked about is your kind of immigration journey. So we will get to that, right? Because you're originally, from America, you grew up here, you were born here, and then now you live in Spain. So we will talk about that. But, with this show, I really love to dig into the guest's kind of story. A lot of people know you at this point as well. You share a lot of amazing content on LinkedIn and across social media. You've helped dozens and dozens and dozens of immigration professionals get jobs. But I don't know. A lot of people probably don't know, who is Joey, right? Like, where are you from? What's your background? So, let's chat a little bit about that. I know you were born in the U.S. Your family's comes from Irish kind of roots with your last name and all. Do you, by the way, know when they came to the U.S.? Your family?
So yeah, I actually don't know. I've done a little bit of research, but I believe on my dad's side, they came in, in the 1800s through Ellis Island, but I haven't done, a ton of research about it. My mom's side, mostly from, I think, Norway. And so they also have their own immigration journey, which I think was a little bit different than my dad's side. But yeah, I haven't done a ton of research about it.
That would be, and I'm sure that they have those records at Ellis Island too. That would be a really fun trip back to New York with the family to check that out.
Yeah, exactly.
I wonder if, there was a huge, Irish and Italian immigration wave into the U.S. in the late 1800s. Or did you say, or was it even earlier than that? You think that you're?
No, I think it was late 1800s.
Yeah. late 1800s, early 1900s. It was a lot of the Irish, Italians, and the Jews. I mean, my family came in 1990, so we missed that first big wave of Jews. But that was really New York City was established really as a huge hub for Irish, Italian, and Jewish immigrants. Do you know if your dad's side landed and stayed in New York? I mean, after getting processed through Ellis
So
Island.
no, they came in, yeah, through New York, but then they ended up in Philadelphia. So that's where my dad was born. That's where his family stayed for, I think they pretty much went there very quickly after New York. So
Mm.
they were based in Philly.
Do you know what they did that sort of few generations back in Philly? I mean, were they kind of like laborers working in various, I mean, it's a pretty industrial
Yeah,
town, Philly.
yeah, exactly. No, I don't know a ton about my dad's side, but I do know. So his father, so my grandfather, who's
Mhm.
who's since passed, I mean, I think he was a metal worker,
Mhm.
but he also worked for Gulf, the oil company.
Well, I guess, yeah.
And so yeah, so he ended up being an office worker, but I don't have a ton. I think laborers, workers, tradespeople working
Yeah.
in Philly. But yeah, I don't have a ton of knowledge about my dad's side.
Yeah, fair enough. But anyways, so I like to ask that sometimes because mostly everyone, unless you're truly Native American fully, you probably have somebody that has come from other countries. So it is cool at the very least to know where they came from. Okay, so you grew up in Philly. I mean, is that where you were raised as a kid?
Yeah, so I grew up in a small town called Middletown, Pennsylvania, which is near Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, the capital.
Mm,
It's very close to Hershey, Pennsylvania,
nice.
also known as the sweetest place on earth. You might know from Hershey Park if you've if you visited there. Yeah, and
Yeah.
so I was born there, grew up there, except for a short stint in Virginia. But yeah, most of my childhood was spent in a very small town in central Pennsylvania. Um, not the most exciting place to be. A exciting day was going to the 7-Eleven across the street to get some bazooka gum. So
Yeah.
it was a pretty low key kind of normal town. The one thing that did set us apart was I was actually homeschooled. My parents homeschooled their kids for religious reasons, academic reasons. So I grew up in the kind of insular, not religious community exactly, but definitely a community that was a little bit closed off
Mm,
from the rest of the town. But yeah, I was homeschooled for 12 years of my
mhm.
entire childhood education was spent, at home.
Yeah. Yeah, I've met a lot of people in my life, more recently, obviously, who've homeschooled or thinking about homeschooling their kids. I mean, so you were being homeschooled. Obviously, were there some sort of exams that you had to take anyway that, show that the schooling was on par with kind of public schools and whatnot? I mean, so how did that work out?
Yeah, exactly. So in Pennsylvania, at least at the time, you had to provide what was called a portfolio to the
Mhm.
school superintendent. And it was basically a record of everything that you learned in that academic year. So, for math, it would be math tests that you took and how you did on it, papers that you wrote, science reports, whatever the subject was, you had to provide evidence that you progressed in a way that was appropriate for your grade level.
Mm,
And then you would submit that to the school superintendent who would take a look at it, make sure everything seemed fine. At the same time, I believe at the beginning of the school year, you also had to submit plans for what you plan to
mm,
teach for that academic year. So there's definitely some oversight. I know some states can have different levels of oversight, but yeah, there was definitely um, some lesson plans we had to follow for the
yeah.
school year.
Do you remember, were you kind of a very studious kid? I mean, it's obviously a different context when you're at home because the motivations are different. You're not seeing, 10, 15, 30 other kids doing different things, pulling you in different directions. But I think we probably have some natural tendencies even as kids, right? Do you remember being more studious and interested? Were you kind of like a tinkerer, somebody who kind of broke things, trying to put them back together to see what was happening under the hood? Like, do you have memories like that at all?
Yeah, I was definitely somewhat studious. I mean, I loved reading as a kid. So like books were my escape. So I always was reading, at a, you know, not say a fairly high level. Like I was like, Hardy Boys initially, and then as I progressed, I definitely got into some more, you know, different types of literature. But yeah, I loved reading books. I loved writing, and so that was, that was a big part of my life growing up.
Did you have anybody in your family who is maybe entrepreneurial, either owned a small business or I don't know, a shop or anything like that? Like, did you have any of those
Yeah,
influences?
no, absolutely not. I mean, well, that's not true. That's not true. So my mom actually started a basically it was classes for homeschoolers. So it
Hmm.
was once a week classes that you could go um, to for different subjects that were harder to teach at home. So for example, like science classes, it's hard to do experiments at home. And so she started this sort of organization that offered classes for homeschoolers in different subject areas, English, math, science, and so on, language. And so she started essentially her own business doing that. And so that was probably in terms of a family member doing some sort of entrepreneurial thing, that would be it. My dad typically had, office jobs and worked for various companies, but my mom actually did have some entrepreneurial things going on.
And that would be basically, other parents are homeschooling their kids, but then for certain subjects, maybe once a week or whatever it was, they would all convene at your house and kind of take a class
Yeah.
together.
Not at my house, but like a local church
Oh,
that
gotcha.
had some classrooms and some spaces for where people
Uh,
could meet up.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, that's really cool. And so I mean, were you aware of the fact that, I mean, did she have to market this? Was she never talking about anything related to that business? I mean, right?
Yeah,
Like,
I mean,
yeah.
yeah, it was definitely like a labor of love because I think she started it because it was like trying to solve a pain point in her own life, which was,
Mhm.
there's some subjects that parents, especially as the kids got older, more advanced, it's harder to teach those subjects at home. And so I think she was trying to solve a solution in her own life. And then
Mhm.
she realized this is actually applicable to other homeschool parents as well. And so if you have a kid who's getting into like middle school or high school where the subjects are more advanced and maybe you don't have a science background or a math background or a language background, it made sense to then hire so teachers who have expertise in that area. And then she started it. She did the marketing. She did all of my dad did the accounting or the bookkeeping. So it was definitely a family project. But yeah, she sure did everything for herself. And it was interesting to see how hard it is to start a business, even um, one that seems fairly straightforward. There's so many aspects to running a business that are challenging. And so yeah, she was doing all of it herself, and yeah, and it was successful. It really met a need for parents in the area who were homeschooling their kids.
It's such a great example too of how simple an entrepreneurship can be, right? But oftentimes, whether it's that or building, Google or something that, as sophisticated as a massive international conglomerate, it often starts from, solving a problem and usually solving the founders or one of the founders' problem, or at least a problem that they encountered. So that's great, and it's cool to think about how maybe that subconsciously laid some foundation, right? Some groundwork. Because when
Yeah.
you see something at home, you tend to be influenced by it. So okay, so you were homeschooled, and then and was that all the way through, I guess, sixth grade, or what did you do kind of in excuse me, middle school, high school, and sort of later
Yeah,
ages?
it was all the way through high school. So I was
Gotcha.
homeschooled from grade 1 to grade 12.
So then eventually you went off to college. You went to Thomas Aquinas, which is, by the way, where is that based?
So that's in
Oh, it's in
California,
California.
Southern
Yeah.
California. Yeah, it's in Santa Paula, California, which is near Ojai,
So
near Santa
that's
Barbara.
so that is. I was thinking you went somewhere in Pennsylvania, but you said I'm out of here. I'm going to go to the other side of the
Yeah,
country.
I think
What was
after
that?
12
What was
years,
that like?
yeah, after 12 years at home, I was ready to get out. It was a good experience. You know, I love being in California. I definitely was always interested in traveling and kind of experiencing something other than central Pennsylvania. I planned a trip to Europe by myself when I was 16, which somehow my parents let me go on by myself. So I was always like very interested in trying, in traveling, trying to get out of Pennsylvania. And so I applied to Thomas Aquinas College and got in there, of course. And it was great. It's a great book school, which is there's only a few in the U.S., but essentially it's a school that really focuses on reading original texts of the Western canon. So you read it's a lot of philosophy and theology, but you do everything from Euclid to the reading the Greek tragedies to a lot of original theological works, Thomas Aquinas, and so on. But it's meant to be a discussion based format, and so instead of having lectures from the professors, you sat around a table and just read a few chapters of whatever work was assigned, and then you talked about it.
Wow. But were there also, I mean, did you have to do your basic kind of any science or math classes or
Yeah,
anything?
it was. You had math, science, literature, philosophy, but it was for the most part all meant to be based on original works. And so, like for theology, you read the Bible, you read different historical theological texts. For math, it was kind of pieced together because you would obviously do Euclid, you would do read other mathematicians, which are sometimes quite challenging. But I would say it was more like the history of math or like the
Hmm.
history of science, since you didn't have a textbook essentially. I mean, it's a very niche education and not really applicable to
It's like Dad, what's 5 + 5? You're like, well, what is addition? What
yeah,
does addition mean?
exactly. Yeah.
I don't know what 5 + 5 is, but I can tell you about the philosophy behind two entities forming a third that is the sum of the first two.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So it's that type of education. It's not a typical, if you're trying to get an engineering degree, for
Right.
example, like it's completely worthless in terms of the practical knowledge you need to have.
You know what's funny? And I've talked about this in other episodes. So I studied initially, came into university studying financial economics, which sounds very practical, but it was in our School of Liberal Arts, so it wasn't actually, I mean, yes, there was supply and demand curves and whatnot, but you're studying um, political philosophers really who doubled as economists in like the 16, 17, 1800s, and I guess some in the 1900s. I don't even remember. I have some of these textbooks still at home. And the funny thing is that I did 5 years in college because I wanted to do a master's program, and then I ended up dropping it, and then I was already stuck for a fifth year, so I did a double major, and my second major was philosophy, politics, and law. So it was kind of this hybrid. It was like kind of a pre-law course, but really focused on some of probably what you did in college. But what was interesting is that, and this is kind of the point that I'm getting to, a lot of the texts that I read in that fourth and fifth year for political philosophy and economic philosophy was what informed all of the equations that I was learning my first, second, and third year. And that initial couple of years in college, when they thrust an 18-year-old kid into supply demand curves, I don't know what a means of production is. I mean, maybe other kids do, and I was just a a dumb freshman, but it made so much more sense to me to learn the thought process behind some of these, economists' kind of equations and things, which they wrote about, right? And they explained. It was, and so then when I would go back to the equations, I would now understand the underpinning of it. And so it's funny, I'm obviously teasing the whole concept of like learning math through original text, but actually, I think if you do it that way, and then you move on to sort of the numbers and the abstract part of it, at least for the way my brain works, it is way more impactful and it makes me understand it way better than if I just through rote memorization remember a formula but don't understand fundamentally what the formula is trying to achieve. So
Yeah,
I love it.
exactly.
There are a lot of consulting firms and other companies that look for people who have that kind of background that you've shared, rather than like, let's say, a pure math background. I mean, there is a lot of that. If we talk about recruiting, and we'll get to that later, where recruiters are looking for those skills as well, and they'll just teach you the math, quote unquote, but they want to know that you fundamentally think a certain way.
Yeah, exactly. No, it was very good at encouraging that type of thought process, like looking at the why behind things, which I think which is what I've always been interested in as well. So yeah, I mean, you should have gone there. I think it sounds like
Yeah,
you would have
I would have loved
excelled.
it. Yeah,
Yeah.
I did it the other way around. And funny enough, I was not a great student my first couple of years because, again, I didn't know this about myself. I'm more of a why person first, and then my last couple of years, I was just A, and I'm like, damn it! If only I knew this 4 years ago, I would have flipped the script and started off, the other way. But in any case, okay, so you graduated from college. You have this degree. You are in California. What's your first move? I mean, I know you eventually went to NYU and you got some additional education later from like an HR perspective, but
Yeah.
you sound primed to be a lawyer. I mean, right? Like you've read books your whole life. You enjoy reading. You went to a school where you sit around and discuss in a small group, theories and understanding things. I mean, that is perfect, you know, grounds for becoming an attorney. Did you think this way? I mean, because I know you obviously went into a law firm kind of shortly after graduation, but what was your thought process at the time?
Yeah, so I knew I didn't want to be an attorney. So my dad actually went to law school when I was actually older. So I think I was
Oh,
about
wow.
9 or 10 years old. And so he took a career break. He went back to law school, and then he actually didn't end up working as an attorney. So, but I knew that I was pretty sure that being a lawyer wasn't for me. And so yeah, after I graduated, I really had to think hard about what I wanted to do and my next step. And honestly, I didn't know. And so I moved to New York City, which my
As one
brother
does.
yeah, this is what you do if you don't know what you're going to do with your life, because it's really easy to live there. And my older brother went to school there. He's works in film and TV, and he had an apartment in Williamsburg. So I moved there. I slept on his kitchen floor for
Nice.
6 months and tried to figure out my next step. And before I left at TAC, there was a kind of career advisor, and he was like, "You should try being a paralegal because there's writing involved. There's have to be able to think critically, but there's a lot of like research and writing that you have to do to be a paralegal." So I thought, okay, maybe I'll try that. And so when I moved to New York, though, my work background was always in restaurants, and I was working like for the school cafeteria, doing catering and all that. So I tried to get a job in the restaurant industry, but a lot of jobs in the restaurant industry, they wanted New York experience, and so there was that kind of catch-22. It was like, you need New York restaurant experience to get this job, and so I was striking out. And then I saw an ad in the New York Times for an immigration paralegal, just sort of as I was going through the wanted ads, and it was a firm called Barson Muckamal in Midtown Manhattan, and I faxed in my resume because they wanted you to fax in your resume. Had to go to a shop to fax the resume in, and that and I interviewed there. I got the role, was offered the job at the interview. And so, yeah, it was an unusual interview experience, which, probably wasn't the best template for how interviews should be done and hiring should be done, but it was an interesting experience. And yeah, so I kind of just sort of fell into immigration law, to be perfectly honest, because I wasn't even thinking about that as a possible career path.
Mm-hmm. And so, I mean, first of all, that's awesome, and I can't imagine the idea of getting you've been striking out, sleeping on your brother's floor, and then you go into this office in Midtown Manhattan, which is fancy, you're
Yeah,
in a sense, and you get a job on the spot,
yeah.
which is what a
Yeah, he told me to think about it. So I interviewed with Philip Kleiner, who is a immigration attorney, worked for many years there at Barst. And yeah, it was like I had been striking out. I'd go to interviews at restaurants, and like no one was there in the restaurant. The restaurant was empty. And I was like, where's everyone? And then yeah, to have the interview then offered at this, or had the job offered on the spot, I was like, okay, I think I should take this.
Yeah. That's great. So you accepted the job, and by the way, were you able to move out? I mean, how was it?
No,
How was that
I
for
was
you as a
Yeah, so I was offered to, it was 30K per year, which is this is 2003, and it was the most amount of money I'd ever made in my life. And I thought, this is it. I've made it. I'm gonna I've arrived in New York. I'm making 30K a year. This is awesome. I was still sleeping on my brother's kitchen floor in an air mattress, which at the beginning of the night, it would be pumped up, and then at the end of the night, in the morning, it would be
on the
completely
floor?
flat.
Yeah.
And so I'd be on
Yeah.
the floor.
Yeah.
But I was able to buy a futon after a few months, so I got a mattress. But yeah, I was able to eventually move out, but it took a while because New York's an expensive place, and 30K
Yeah.
a year doesn't go very far.
Yeah. Even back then. And that's why I live in Queens, in the middle of Queens. To be fair, I grew up here where I live, but so you were at Barst for quite a while. I mean, and I know you kind of you took a few other jobs after that, but you were at this firm for a while, so you really kind of cut your teeth there. Were you? What was your impression of the immigration industry? I mean, this is your first job. You're not just learning about how to read and write, but you're also learning about the subject matter, right? You're presumably reading the regs and the code. What were your impressions at the time of this industry? You've obviously stayed in it. It's been more than
Yeah.
20 years.
Yeah, it's been over 20 years. Yeah, I mean, it was really, I was thrown into the deep end initially. Like my first day at work, I was given a blanket L1 to do. And so I quickly had to kind of learn about immigration law. And, there wasn't, if I would say, my boss at the time, Mr. Kleiner, he was actually a great teacher. And so, along with reading different cases and the templates, and reading some of the regs, like having a boss who's able to teach was actually a huge, was great because he was able to explain immigration law in a way that was very understandable and accessible. And so that was really fantastic. And I started with blanket L1s. I moved to H1Bs, O1s. I did pretty much everything there. O1s, I-140s of all different categories. I never did perm, but yeah, it was a really great introduction to immigration law and learning how the U.S. immigration system works.
And so I know from there you moved on. You were there for 7 years, so
Yeah.
obviously this was a good job. You stayed there. They valued you. You moved on from there to Daryanani Law Group, another New York-based immigration firm. And then so at this point is where you started, I guess, to see more broadly or experience more broadly what the immigration industry has to offer. You were no longer, I guess, just a paralegal. I guess you were still doing paralegal work, but you then started writing, right? Which I guess goes back to your years of learning, or studying writing and literature in college and previously. And you stayed at this firm for many years. I mean, almost 10 years, I guess, in total.
Yeah, about 10 years. So I was with the bar 7, and then I switched in 2010 to Daryanani, and there was a short time there. I took a sabbatical, took some time off. But yeah, I was there for about 10 years. I started as a paralegal, legal writer, and then I switched to helping manage their blog, and also I switched to operations in HR, and that's where I really started focusing on, how does a law firm, specifically an immigration law firm, operate? What are all the HR functions? How does it run? There's so many, moving parts to successful business, successful law firm. And that's where I really started helping with recruitment and hiring as well.
Now, it's interesting to me because you've shared that as a kid, you were growing up reading a lot, right? You escaped into books, you read a ton of books. You went to college, you went to a college that really, I guess, supported this kind of, uh, way of learning and of interacting. And then you got a job that also requires that. But then now you're suddenly shifting to a more, let's call it practical or, as you said, operational kind of business minded role. W- what do you think shifted in you? Was it just the desire to do something new? I mean, or like, right? Because you could have stayed as a paralegal or frankly gone on to law school, even though you said initially you didn't want to. And you're suddenly doing this thing, which is a totally different skill set and a totally different
Yeah.
perspective. So, I mean, I'm just curious. I mean, was there something inside of you that said, I want to try something new, or did you just you started kind of migrating your thought process in that direction?
I definitely wanted to try something new. I did feel like I had burned out on being a paralegal. And as I talk to paralegals in my own work now, I think that's it's a common experience for a lot of paralegals. When you're doing the same type of cases, over and over again, obviously in immigration law, there's always something new to learn, but it can feel a little repetitive. It can feel like you're kind of just doing the same type of case over and over again. And I think, at least for me personally, I was ready for a new opportunity, something different. And the switching to operations and HR was a new challenge for me. I love learning new things, and so it just felt like a natural fit because I kind of understood, the paralegal side, what that takes. And there was an opportunity then to switch into the HR side, which I then just took. I think, when you're doing cases, you have to sometimes be very creative, and come up with creative arguments. And, you're writing a narrative for different cases and for different, for foreign nationals. But in operations and in HR, you still have to, a lot of times you're solving problems. You do have to be creative. You're finding solutions to things. And so in some way, it didn't feel too different than what I was doing as a paralegal, but it was different enough that I felt a little bit more refreshed, a little more challenged than when I was a paralegal.
And is that when you also went back to school to NYU and to get a certificate in
Yeah, a
HR?
little bit later. Yeah, a little bit later on, I realized, I wanted to, increase my knowledge. I didn't obviously have any classes in HR at Thomas Aquinas College, and so yeah, I went back to NYU for their certificate program in human capital.
It's awesome. I mean, it's great, and it's really it's interesting that you brought that up naturally because I would have asked you later. That burnout is the experience of it, is it's a teaching moment, right? For both what but then and what you want in your life, but then also as a recruiter, what you can tell others to do, perhaps more so even law firms, if they want to retain really good people, keep a pulse, right? Keep your eye
Yeah,
on folks that have been there for a while and check in with them. Are you still fulfilled? Is there something else like that you could do here because we want to keep you? And so
yeah.
ironically, it's probably a good thing that you had that experience, right? Rather than if you kept bouncing around, because the insights from it are, I think, pretty great. So I at this point, you've been at Daryanani Law Group. You were there until 2021. So like right just into the sort of start of the pandemic, and then you left, and then your life changed, right? Because
Right.
now you became an immigrant.
That's right.
And so can you share a little bit about that? I mean, kind of maybe if you can, what spurred the idea of, you and your and wife moving to Spain, and sort of what was that experience like for you now as somebody who's been born and bred in America, becoming now an immigrant, the very person that you've helped
Yeah.
in two different law firms over the past, almost 2 decades.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I've always traveled internationally, as I mentioned, since I was 16. And I think always in the back of my mind, I knew I wanted to live abroad at some point. But so at the time, so when the pandemic started, my son had just turned 1, like the weekend in New York when everything shut down. De Blasio was like a week before saying, go to movies, go to restaurants, it's fine. And then there was that weekend in, I think, the first part of March in 2020, where like everything shut down. It was the weekend of my oldest son's birthday. And so we were stuck in an apartment with my 1-year-old son whose daycare had been canceled. My wife and I were fortunate enough to keep our jobs, but we were working full-time jobs with our son, going a little bit crazy, maybe, banging our pots at 7 p.m. at night. And we were watching International House Hunters at night and the show called MedLife, which features people who relocated to the Mediterranean. And my in-laws had retired to Spain about 15 years ago. And so my wife and I, when we first met, and then when we got married, we'd always been visiting Spain. So that once or twice a year, we'd come to visit Spain. And so we were in our apartment during the pandemic in New York, and we realized, hey, maybe we should try to get out of here. This might be a good time to start thinking about moving on. And New York, as you know, is an expensive place. Our son's daycare was like $3,000 a month. And so we realized if we wanted to have more kids, it would be very hard to do that in New York. And we said, okay, we know people. My in-laws live in Spain. We like it there. Let's see about trying to move there. And Spain actually has some, pretty, say, friendly, or has good options for moving there. They actually now have a digital nomad visa, but they have some other visa options that worked really well for us. And so I put on my paralegal cap. I looked at all the regulations. It's a much different process than how U.S. immigration works, but there's some similar things. And so I got all the documents ready. I was running around New York. A lot of offices were closed because of the pandemic, and so I would have you'd have to find out when they're open. They're open like 1 day a week in New York. You have to be here at this time. You have to get this document notarized, and it was an interesting process. Background, like FBI background checks and all that. And definitely being a paralegal helped because I looked at, the list of required documents. I made copies. Everything was in duplicate,
Right.
like that training kicked in. And so we would present a good application. And then, so then in 2021, we got our visas approved and we moved to Spain.
So, I mean, huge life change. And now it's funny that you got to go through the process as well. It's great that you did it yourself. I didn't know that. That's kudos to you. So you moved in 2021, and I guess at this point were you no longer working at the firm? I mean, because now you're overseas, or were you kind of still working remotely a little bit?
No, I stopped working there. I wanted to take a break to get settled in Spain, and just have another sort of career break while I figured out my next steps.
Okay, so and the next steps, of course, were the beginnings of Immigration Jobs. Before we get to that, I just want to take a quick pause as well to say thank you to the second sponsor of this episode, which is Lex Reception. So for anybody who's never heard of Lex Reception, they are a legal intake, reception, and client support service. From answering phone calls, and messages in real time to scheduling appointments, Lex Reception provides immigration law firm clients with 24/7 legal answering specialists who know how the law firm works. They know the kind of questions to ask and the kind of answers to give, so that the law firm doesn't have to worry about missing a phone call from a client or a prospect. Lex Reception also have members that can proactively reach out. So let's say somebody fills out a form on your website or gets in touch with you some other way to learn about your firm. Lex Reception can help you do some outbound initial sales. They integrate with a number of legal tech platforms, so they can kind of be integrated into your tech stack, whether it's Clio or Practice Panther or others. So for any immigration law firms that are listening that are interested in having a kind of third-party receptionist service that can learn about what your law firm does and provide you with the service that you need, check out Lex Reception. They're giving $250 off their first month of service if you use the link in the show notes. So reach out to them and tell them that you heard about them from the GMI Rocket show. So thank you to Lex Reception. And that's, by the way, lexreception.com is the website. Okay, so you're in Spain. You are taking a career break. You're settling in. You've got this almost at this point 2 decades, like 17 years of immigration law experience, everything from paralegal, senior paralegal, to writer, to hiring in HR, to operations. I mean, you've done everything but be a lawyer on paper. Although, I always say when I was practicing and I first started, sure, I was the lawyer, but let's be honest, the education came from the paralegals that knew what the heck they were doing and who taught me quite a lot, and oftentimes, especially in the beginning, helped me with the drafting and the writing and the forms and everything. So you started to, I guess, think about what you can do. How did you land on this idea of immigration jobs, of a recruiting service for immigration law firms?
Yeah, so when I was working in-house at Darnay Law Group and I started helping with hiring, I quickly found how challenging that was, especially for a small immigration firm. So we would post job ads and get, a few responses, not great applications. We tried working with the legal recruiter, and, first they would send us applications or candidates that were way off base. So they would send us, personal bankruptcy attorneys or criminal defense attorneys, not even really in the same ballpark. And then, we would say, no, we need immigration attorneys, someone who's done O1s and EB1As and NIWs and L1s, for example. And then they would say, oh, okay. And they would send us attorneys who were, doing deportation defense or asylum or family-based immigration, which are very, very different things than business immigration. And then finally, when they sent us a candidate who had business immigration experience, it was like, okay, this is more of what we're looking for. It was, okay, how much is this candidate going to cost if we hire them? And I think at the time it was like 25% of the first year's salary, which for a small immigration firm is, 12 people paying 40, 50K for one candidate. It's a big ask for a small business. And so I had always thought, that it would have been so nice to have a legal recruiter who understood immigration law and also maybe have a job board that was specifically tailored to immigration jobs. I know that Ayla has a career site as well, which can be super useful, but I always felt there was this need for a recruiter who understood immigration law, who wouldn't, if you asked for someone, an attorney who knows O1s and EB1As, they don't send you an attorney who does, asylum and humanitarian-based relief. And so it always been in the back of my mind since I had been working in operations and HR. And so when I moved here, I took the career break and I was actually just applying for roles. I thought maybe I'll try something else, different than immigration law. I did immigration law for a long time. And I was applying for roles and wasn't getting any responses. So I thought, maybe I should use my immigration law background. And so I started in 2023. Okay, I'm going to start a job board for immigration law jobs. And I just started, researching, reading about starting your own business. so I had a fairly good understanding of what immigration law firms need, and what type of candidates do well at immigration law firms. But the parts of running your own business, I didn't really know anything about, and so that was a big learning curve for me.
And so, you first started to think about it as a job board. What did you do? I mean, did you reach out to law firms that you had already, maybe your prior employers, or did you reach out to lawyers you knew at other firms and say, hey, here's what I'm doing. Do you want to post a
Yeah.
job, or did you reach out to candidates, or like, how did you get that started?
So I was reaching out to attorneys in my network, managing partners, and I did a survey. So I created this survey on Google Forms where it was asking different questions about, like, what's your biggest hiring challenge, or what's your biggest pain point for hiring? And it was like asking about job boards, asking about other immigration services. And I was also just talking to managing partners, to attorneys, and seeing, like, what do you need in terms of recruitment help? And the more I talked to attorneys who were hiring, I realized that they really wanted high touch, like premium recruitment services. They didn't care so much about the job board, as much as finding someone who could just handle the process for them. Managing partners, as you know, they're so busy. They have 100 unread messages in their inbox. They don't want to deal with all that. They need someone who can take the process over and then send qualified and screened candidates to them. And so that's what I was discovering in the end, after talking to attorneys.
So, and that became what is today, I guess, ImmigrationJobs. I love the website. I love the name because there's no ifs, ands, or buts of what you're doing.
It's pretty clear. It's pretty clear.
It's very, very clear, which, I mean, to me is brilliant. At immigrationjobs.io, I know it's the URL. So, to talk a little bit about what is the company today. I mean, who are your clients? How do you help them? Like, if I'm listening to this or watching this right now, and maybe I run an immigration law firm, or I run, now there's so many options, immigration tech companies, et cetera. What would I reach out to you for? Like, what can you help me with?
Yeah, so I help boutique practices, boutique immigration firms, and also immigration tech companies with hiring attorneys, paralegals, and support staff. So if an immigration firm, and typically it's a smaller practice, anywhere from 5 to 25, 30 people, or an immigration tech company, if they need to hire an attorney or paralegal support staff, they reach out to me. And what I've been finding is typically it's for experienced candidates, so experienced attorney or experienced paralegal. Haven't really been asked to help for entry-level positions so much, but I think it's for roles that maybe firms are having trouble filling. They don't know where to start. They don't like the applicants that are coming in. And so what I can do is then I help them with I partner with them throughout the recruitment process, from the initial stages all the way to sort of the final offer, salary negotiations, and offer. And one of the main differences between me and a traditional recruiter is that I have a flat fee structure. So I bill in a similar way to the way most immigration attorneys bill. They're not billing on the hour. I don't typically charge a percentage fee of the first year base salary. I have a flat fee, where I bring, for that fee, I bring 3 to 5 candidates to the firms, and I work closely with them on what exactly are they looking for. With my immigration knowledge, if you tell me you need someone who does L1s, TNs, and E2s, I've done those visa types. I know what it takes to do those. I understand the difference between those case types and other case types, and so I'm able to bring a very targeted screen candidate to immigration firms.
And at what point I guess, how are you bringing these candidates in? Do you have a database or a pool of candidates already? Do you then go out and find candidates? Maybe it's a combination of the two.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a combination of those. So I help with the job ad. I write a very specific job ad tailored to this ideal candidate of who they're looking for. I have my own talent pool, my own database of candidates that I reach out to. And then a big part of what I do is I do a very active outreach to candidates. So, as you probably know, for job ads, there's always going to be a certain number of candidates who apply to a job ad, and that's great. You can often find good talent that way, but there's so much talent that is maybe not looking at job ads, who they're interested in finding a new role, but maybe they aren't actively looking at the moment, or they just haven't seen the job ad yet. And so I reach out to candidates directly. I talk to them, see if they're interested in the role. That's a big part of what I do. And what was so hard, I think, so hard for a lot of small immigration firms to do that, because it is pretty time consuming and takes a lot of work. But it's a huge part of the talent pool. It's really important to reach out to when you're recruiting for a position.
And I'm assuming that takes a lot of time. And it's probably why most law firms, I mean, they put up a job on Indeed or basic job on LinkedIn, and then they're not, DMing potential candidates who may be employed, to your point, and aren't necessarily actively looking, but could be interested. And so I'm assuming that that's something else that you can do that's a huge value add that they just wouldn't be able to do on their own.
Yeah, actually, it takes a lot of time. It's Yeah, it's pretty exhaustive what I do, and I use tools that are fairly expensive. So LinkedIn Recruiter, for example, it's a great tool. You can do targeted searches for candidates in a very specific way, but it's expensive. It's like 10K a year, and so most small firms don't have
Right.
that in their budget to do. It's not only a time issue, but also a budget issue as well. And so I'm able to use these kind of traditional recruitment tools that are available to larger, firms or larger companies, and I'm able to bring that to smaller firms as well.
So, what advice would you have, for maybe law firms that are hiring? Obviously, the advice would always be reach out to Joey, but
Yeah.
in general, as they're thinking about expanding roles, or as they're thinking about growth, or thinking about hiring, I know there are a million different scenarios, but is there advice that you would generally give folks as they're thinking about hiring new staff for their immigration law firm?
Yeah, I mean, there's a few things I could talk about. There's some very specific things that firms can do. I would say one thing I've discovered is that flexibility is important, and when you're reaching out, one of the biggest things that has sort of affected the candidate pool, is something, for example, like, are you remote or hybrid? There's a few small things that can have a big impact,
So
on
what do you
your
recommend? What do you
candidate
recommend
pool.
there, for example? I mean, that's a
Yeah.
specific one.
So I think law firms need to think really specifically about how important it is for candidates to be in an office. Like, how many days is necessary? Can this role be remote? Remote roles receive many more candidates than in-person roles. Like a 5-day in-person role is very, very hard to fill, and even 4 days. The sweet spot tends to be, I think, 1 or 2 days in office. And I think a lot of firms are, because they've always done things a certain way, they've always had people in the office, maybe 3 or 4 days. With immigration law, there's so many petitions that are paper-based still, so it does make sense to have people in the office. But I think it's good to kind of evaluate how important that is, because that has a huge impact on the candidate pool. And remote roles get so many more applications than in-person roles, and just adjusting from 3-4 days in office to 2 days in office actually has a big impact as well.
Hmm, interesting. And I guess, yeah, the idea is thinking about, okay, how really is 3 days going to be that much more important to you? Or if you could do 1 or 2 days, you can greatly expand the number of people who apply. Do you see any other trends that you think are kind of recommendations nowadays for firms that are hiring, or
Yeah, I
maybe
mean,
retention, or like, looking internally or something like that?
yeah, I mean, I think one thing also that makes a big impact is the job ad. I think a lot of job ads tend to be a list of job duties, not necessarily, they're not really speaking to the candidate. And so I go through a process with my clients where we come up with an ideal candidate summary, kind of an avatar of who they're looking for. And then we write the job ad directed to that candidate. A lot of job ads are focused first on the company, and then you just list all the job duties. But writing that job ad to the candidate is really important because you're kind of speaking to your ideal candidate. And then you could use that job ad, you can use that ideal candidate to then inform, your interview, your written assessment, your reference checks, and the kind of everything that you do. In terms of retention, I think you talked about taking the pulse of your employees, but retention is super important because, retaining a good employee is so much easier than hiring someone new. And if, it comes, sometimes it's as simple as asking, are they happy in their role? Are you being fulfilled? Like, are you, like, what do you like about working here? What can be improved about working here? And so talking to your employees, doing surveys, if you want it to remain anonymous, that's super important because it's so much easier to keep someone there than to do a whole new recruitment process.
And what advice do you give candidates? I mean, because you're obviously working with both sides, even if you're sort of representing the law firm, I suppose you still work deeply with candidates. Do you have advice that you give them?
Yeah, there's a few things, I tell them in terms of roles. I always encourage candidates to, focus on roles that they're well positioned for. They don't have to have all the qualifications, but, having some of them or most of them, like 70% or more of them or 60% or more of them, is really important because firms can be picky now. They can, if they want someone who does, H-1Bs and perms, they can typically find exactly what they're looking for. And so making sure that they're applying for roles that they're well positioned for is important. I would say also too that the immigration law world is, it's a pretty small world. And so trying to get a warm introduction is always important, reaching out to your network. I talk to candidates who sometimes are hesitant about networking, even though they might have a pretty strong network. But that's a fantastic way to learn about job openings and to, see about open roles. Additionally, too, LinkedIn is such a powerful platform because you can reach out to managing partners, and even if that firm doesn't have a job ad up, you can make that connection and ask if they're hiring. I know some candidates are reluctant to do that, but reaching out and being really intentional with your job search can be really effective.
Do you give any advice about LinkedIn? I mean, I know you and I connected on LinkedIn, and I'm very active on it. You're very active on it. Do you give candidates and or law firms any recommendations when they're looking for a role or they're hiring, with respect to LinkedIn?
Yeah, I mean, I try to get them to advertise the job that way, to reach out to their network, to post about hiring. Um, you know, Attorneys are busy, and so it can sometimes be hard for them to make the time for that. For candidates too, I recommend that they post as much as possible. If you can have a consistent posting schedule on LinkedIn, which I sometimes struggle with as well, but a lot of really amazing firms and attorneys are on LinkedIn. They're reading posts, they're connecting with people. That could be an amazing way to make connections and to hear about job openings, and also to find candidates as well.
So what do you, I mean, it's so really great advice. And I mean, and I know you can give so much more advice, obviously, for any individuals. And by the way, and I will say this on the air, for law firms that are looking to hire, they should reach out to you. I mean, period. It's the time spent looking for candidates, the energy wasted, if you will, on, unsuccessful sort of interviews and whatnot, it just makes sense to work with somebody like you. A lot of people are hesitant, and I get it, in our industry and in general, to pay for things when they think, well, I could do this on my own, right? And a lot of times people can do things on their own, but I think there are certain things that you just get so much more out of hiring an expert. I mean, where the efficiency is so much greater, and to me, this is one of those moments, and that's why folks like you exist. Somebody who's so specialized that the law firm barely has to. To your point, if you're a traditional recruiter, even a legal recruiter, which sounds specialized, but when you get into it, you realize, personal injury and immigration and patent and, medical malpractice are vastly different. And if someone's
Yeah.
looking for an experienced professional, you have to get into the weeds of what is needed and what the job requires. And so I think that there's such a need for somebody who, a law firm can get on the phone with, and in 10 minutes, the recruiter knows exactly what they need. You don't have to educate them about the nitty gritty yourself, because then it's like, well, you do. Why don't I just do it? Why am I paying this guy to educate them?
Yeah.
What do you foresee as, the landscape is changing, and I guess immigration law is, I guess, shifting in a way? What do you see as some shifts from the personnel standpoint, hiring standpoint, that you could have some thoughts on?
Yeah, I mean, I think I don't know if I see any big shifts now. I think now more than ever, foreign nationals need good attorneys, and so I think there's always, I see law firms continuing to hire and continue to focus on hiring top talent. I don't think that's changed. Maybe there's um, some hesitations, maybe about growing or being too aggressive with your growth, but I know I've just been seeing law firms continue to wanting to find really great talent to help their clients.
And how do you feel? I guess maybe this is another thing I was thinking about. How do you feel about, you work with tech companies? There are also, these venture-backed ABS, alternative business structure firms. I mean, do you see that continuing to grow? Because it's slightly different. Still the same role, but slightly different environments, cultures, sometimes pay packages. What are you seeing
Yeah.
there, if anything?
Yeah, definitely. I think a lot of these immigration tech companies are maybe filling a need that some traditional law firms haven't, or maybe are struggling with. A lot of immigration tech companies that I work with, they're very focused on customer service, on using technology in a way that some traditional law firms might be hesitant to do. A lot of these tech companies have in-house engineering teams, so they're really creating very well designed in-house case management systems, and they have client portals, and that type of technology can be very appealing to a lot of clients. So I think that I definitely see a lot of growth there, and a lot of attorneys too they want to be able to use AI tools, for example, ethically and responsibly. And a lot of those, immigration tech companies are really leading the way in trying to figure out how to do that.
Interesting. Yeah. And I'm seeing the same thing. I know we've talked offline a little bit, and I'm seeing a roll up happen where a lot of firms are combining and buying, and, bigger firms or mid-sized firms are buying up smaller firms to stay competitive, to grow their book of business, or in some cases, to your point, a mid-sized or bigger firm that is also maybe traditional, but is also very tech savvy. They could bring smaller firms into their ecosystem and have that smaller firm leverage the bigger firm's existing technology and tools, and therefore presumably provide even better service to the client. So, yeah, it's interesting to watch. 2026 is going to be a fascinating year. We're coming off of a year where immigration has been just pounded by our administration, by the Trump administration, in terms of not just the southern border and humanitarian, but family-based, and regular family-based and employment-based immigration as well. We saw the attacks, if you will, on H-1B visas, and now all of the just kind of scary news of ICE just picking people up off the street. I mean, it's crazy.
Yeah.
Obviously, all of this cannot just be sustained, right? So things will shift, and I'm interested to see how 2026 plays out, and also how that affects, whether people are hiring or not, or what kind of firms do better or worse. So yeah,
absolutely.
crazy times. Well, Joey, one last question for you. As you're continuing to grow and working with more firms, and in some cases working with different kind of firms like these tech companies you're talking about, what's some advice that is relevant to you right now? Meaning, what advice are you listening to right now as you're trying to figure out, or grow or continue to take next steps with immigration jobs?
Just whatever advice you have for me, Roman, I'm listening to. Yeah. No, I'm trying. I think that's a good question. I think I'm really trying to refine my processes. I'm still have a lot to learn about running my own business. I think using tech is going to be important. I think in all fields, but especially in for recruiters. So that's a good question.
I mean, it's a great answer. I mean, the reality is, and this is sort of the whole crux of the show. We find ourselves sometimes running businesses for the first time later in life, and we're learning a lot. And I sometimes really envy people who've even maybe forwent college or during college started 1, 2, 3 businesses. They could have been silly businesses, but they figured out a lot of these things that we are now trying to figure out on the fly. So yeah, I definitely hear you. Well, Joey, I know that it's late for you, and I really appreciate it. You taking the time to talk and share your story. Where can people find you? Where can people connect with you? How do they reach out to you best?
Yeah, immigrationjobs.io is my website. I'm also on LinkedIn as well. My full name is Joseph McKeown. They can find me those 2 spots I'm pretty active in.
Cool. And you post quite a lot, so I know that if anyone Googles or goes on LinkedIn and just types in immigration jobs, one word, by the way, they will find you. Well, Joey,
Definitely.
thank you so much. It's been awesome, and I've learned a lot. You and I knew each other already, but like I've still learned a ton about you, and I think it's fascinating to hear about different businesses and journeys in the industry. And I think that what you're doing is genuinely, it's unique and it's really needed. And so I'm really happy that you were able to come on my show and share your story with everybody. And hopefully tons of law firms reach out to you and hire you to help them find the right candidates. Let's connect some good people with some good jobs.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for having me on your show, Roman. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, likewise. I'll talk to you soon, and have a great night. I know it's evening for you, so thank you.
All right, take care, Roman.
Awesome. What a great episode. I will reiterate, if you are hiring, if you're an immigration law firm, reach out to Joey, reach out to immigrationjobs.io. It is he's great, and he's really helping folks find the right candidates, and I know how hard that is. So definitely recommend that. I wanted to say thank you once again to the main sponsor of this episode, 8 a.m. DocketWise. So once again, if you didn't hear me up top, DocketWise is an end-to-end immigration case management platform. DocketWise provides best-in-class immigration forms, which is really how they started. For most people, in fact, just off the cuff here, but a lot of firms use DocketWise and maybe even other platforms for sort of broader document management, but they at least use DocketWise for forms because they are one of the best, if not the best, for immigration forms. They have really customizable questionnaires that you can send to your clients in different languages so that you meet the client where they are. They have integrations with a ton of different platforms, great customer service. DocketWise, again, provides a lot of really wonderful content so you can engage with DocketWise for free. Check out their blog, check out their ebook, listen to their podcast, peruse the website. There's a lot that you can learn from them, even if you're not looking for a new case management system, or forms management system right now. So please visit their website, 8am.com/DocketWise, or check the link in the show notes. And of course, if you talk to them, do tell them you heard about them from the GMI Rocket show. So with that, thank you everybody for tuning in, for listening, for watching. I hope this was an awesome episode for you as much as it was for me. Take care of yourselves. Have a wonderful weekend, and peace out.